So welcome everyone to the official book launch, the Geneva book launch of the Investigator, Demons of the Balkan War. We have with us the author of the book, Vladimír Dzuro, and we are very honored to have him with us. Some of you that have read the book will feel the same way. It's very interesting always to have a witness, so to say, who has been there in a conflict or where war crimes have happened with us and to tell the story. I think that's a very powerful message, I think. Before kind of introducing our panelists, I would just like to say a few words of welcome again to the Geneva Academy. I want to say a few words about this very room of the Geneva Academy. It's a very historic room. We are in the Antonio Cassese room. The room has been named after the first president of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Antonio Cassese is kind of a figure in the area of human rights, area of international criminal law, international law in general, and he was very close to the Geneva Academy, so we put the name in honor of him. And it's also interesting for the topic we talk here today, because we will talk about war crimes committed in the territory of the former Yugoslavia. Just for the purpose of this room has a historic significance. This house used to belong, or this villa used to belong to the family of Gustave Monnier. Gustave Monnier, some of you might know, he was the first president of the International Committee on the Red Cross. He's also one of the founders of the International Committee on the Red Cross, together with Henri Dunant. Also, this very villa, or this very house, was the headquarters of the International Committee on the Red Cross during the Second World War. So they had their headquarters from 1933 to 1946 in these very rooms. And also for the development of international law, in particular international humanitarian law, this very room is also important. One of the first discussions around the Geneva Conventions of 1864 took place in this room, and some people say that the idea of an international criminal court was developed in these very halls by Gustave Monnier, who was one of the first who had the idea of establishing an international criminal court. So historic ground, historic also discussions we will have in a second, which are still relevant today. So welcome again from our side, from the Geneva Academy, and I have the honor to hand over the floor to the permanent representative, the ambassador of the Czech Republic to the United Nations here in Geneva, and he will say a few words of welcome and also introducing our guest speaker here today. So, Mr. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, causes, consequences and atrocities committed by all parties during the Yugoslav wars have been subject to endless discussions, debate, and the discussions are still pending even throughout the years. Today I have the honor and the privilege to be here at the launch of the very important book, The Investigator, written by Vladimír Dzuro, Demons of the Balkan War, whom I'd like to welcome and congratulate on behalf of the Czech Republic. In the last 36 years, Mr. Dzuro has served as an exemplary professional, both in the public sphere, on the state sphere in the Czech Republic, as well as on the international plane. He worked for the Interpol, notably for the United Nations, in relations to the conflict in the former Yugoslavia. Currently, Vladimir holds the position of Chief of Headquarters Investigation Unit at the United Nations Office of International Oversight Services in New York. Working for the United Nations peacekeeping mission, Vladimir had the opportunity to be directly engaged in the field, witnessing the horrors of the war-torn region from besieged Sarajevo. Afterwards, he continued his journey with the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia, investigating the war crimes committed during the conflict. The Investigator was originally published in the Czech Republic, where it became a bestseller and currently is in its third reprint. On November the 1st, 2019, the book was published in the United States with a global distribution. It has been introduced to the public in London, Hague, New York, and today I would like to introduce you here at the Geneva Academy. Vladimir offers a realistic picture of the war crimes investigations, with one of the main focuses being the Vukovar massacre and the tracking down and trying of those responsible for this gruesome act. Even after all these years, the brutalities, tortures, killings, and all the other monstrosities are difficult to comprehend. to provide such a realistic, chilling, and first-hand account is an extremely valuable contribution that will most certainly be acclaimed by the general public on the whole. I would like to thank Vladimír for his book, for being with us today, for joining us, and for his overall contribution to the cause. And I wish him all the best in his future endeavors, both professional as well as personal. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to our speaker today. We are all very eager to hear his talk, and thank you very much again for being here with us today.
Thank you. Before I start talking, because when I start talking on war crimes, I'll never stop. First, I would like to thank the ambassador for actually organizing this for me, and the academy, and Thomas for having me here. And thank you for all of you who come here to listen to me, because the topics are not easy. Not everybody wants to listen to the war crimes issues. I need to, from the happy picture, I need to actually go to the beginning. I need to make the disclaimer. It's very important for me because I work for the United Nations, and so I need to make a disclaimer at the outset. Everything what I'll be telling you here today is my own account of things. It has nothing to do with the opinions of the United Nations or the International Criminal Tribunal. All the mistakes are mine. The other things is important. My book is not balanced. I was tasked with investigation of the crimes committed by the Serbs on Croats and Bosniaks. That's why the book is about what I investigated. It in no means to mean that the crimes were not committed by Croats or by Bosniaks on the others. But because I didn't investigate that, the book is not about it. And it's important for all of you to understand that, or people who will listen to it. I am not saying that the Serbs were worse than anybody else. I'm just saying that my book is about crimes committed by the Serbs. And what I just learned now from your speech is Antonio Cassese actually was a judge who I faced in a courtroom. I didn't know it until now, because the case I'm going to be presenting, Judge Cassese was actually the presiding judge on it, which is an unbelievable coincidence. So now I move to the presentation, if I may. I will give you opportunity to ask questions at the end, but if you have some urgent questions, if I didn't say something that you understand, just stop me. I'm happy to answer the questions even during the presentation. I always start with the maps, if I may, because not everybody, in Europe pretty much, but in the US not everybody knows where the former Yugoslavia is. That's why I'm using that for the demonstrations. So there was a part of the Europe that during my childhood was believed to be better communist countries than the other communist countries. A reason for that was because Tito, who was the president, didn't go with Stalin, and then he decided to accept the Marshall Plan from the United States. And so by separating himself from the Soviet Union, he became the better communist than the other communists, which in result was that the Yugoslavia was treated differently than the rest of the communist world, and also they were getting the loans from the West on better conditions. So I called it cheap money, and the cheap money were used for the welfare of the country, not always wisely, but everything was fantastic as long as there was the bipolar Europe, the free Europe and the communist Europe, until the time that Tito died. That's Tito. He died in 1980, and then what happened after that in the former Yugoslavia started getting slowly into the political and economic crisis. And there was a new movement within the Yugoslavia where the different countries started to think the same way like in Czechoslovakia about their own identity. And then getting closer to 1990, there was three main politicians who generated themselves from that. It was Slobodan Milošević. He became the most powerful of all because he controlled not only the Serbs and Montenegrins living in Serbia, but also those territories which were outside of Serbia. There was a huge minorities of Serbs living in Croatia, and also a big part of Bosnia and Herzegovina is naturally lived by the Serbs. So he controlled those territories. Then put Franjo Tuđman to the right. Franjo Tuđman was another very powerful politician from Croatia, who was nationalistic in contrast to Milosevic. Milosevic was opportunist. He would use any means to stay in power. He became known through playing the Kosovo card, where he staged a big rally on Kosovo Pole, which is very heart of the Serbian feelings, where he told the world that nobody will ever beat Serbs in that territory again, which made him absolutely popular overnight. You know, he was the communist apparatchik before, hardly known in contrast to the other politicians, but he became very prominent. And in his prominency, he started to control media. And I'm saying that now because the media play a very important role in what I'm going to be telling you today. Alija Izetbegović is in the middle of it because he truly was in the middle of it. You know, if you look at the Bosnia and Herzegovina, there's a big portion is Serbian inhabited, and then you have Herzegovina down and other areas which are Croatian inhabited. And then when I don't know now, but when we investigated, when you asked Croats who the Bosniaks were, they were telling us, well, these are basically Croats, but during the Ottoman time, they were kind of turned into Bosniaks. When we asked Serbs, they were saying, well, they're actually Serbs, but you know, during the Ottoman time, they were turned into Bosniaks because the Muslim religious. So we were looking at that, you know, that nobody actually believed that the Bosniaks be part of the community. That was the perception we had when we were talking to the people. Alija Izetbegović became the president, and at certain point, around 1990, if I'm not mistaken, there was this decision, a political decision was made to come with a referendum about the independence, because all those countries there was this movements for the independence. So there was a referendum for the independence, and in most of the country, apart from Serbia, I think, the vote was for the independence. Okay, so they all were subject of the ICTY investigations. President Tuđman and President Izetbegović died before the process was completed, so I cannot say they would have been indicted. I just don't know because I didn't work on it. But the work was being done on the investigations. You know, we investigated President Milosevic. I worked on that project, and as you know, he was indicted, and he wasn't prosecuted because he died during the process. The Declaration of Independence, the first country that actually declared independence from Yugoslavia was Slovenia and Croatia. Again, if you look at demographics, in Slovenia, there was a very little Serbs living on the territory. So the war, it really started in the Balkans, in Slovenia, which was so-called 10 days war. There was a conflict, but then the parties came together and decided that they are going to pull the Yugoslav army out of Slovenia, and then Slovenia become independent country. So all the move of the military from Slovenia ended up in Croatia, which was to the Croats didn't like that really, because all of a sudden all the military forces, which were Yugoslavian, ended up on the territory of Croatia, at least for some time. The Croatia declared independence on the same day, but they decided to postpone it based on the pressure from the European Union, the European community at the time, on the 8th of October. I'm joking about that because it's my birthday, so I said they did it because I could remember it. So it's on the 8th of October was the actual effective independence of Croatia. It looks all nice and rosy, you know, if it was not so tragic. What actually happened in Croatia was that when Croats introduced the first new constitution, in their constitution, the Serbs were not treated as an equal. They were as a minority. And for many Serbs, it was unacceptable. All of a sudden, in their own country, as they felt it, they were not equal with the Croats. And Milosevic used that tactic to change mind even the most moderate Serbs, because they start to pull out the Ustashas from the World War II. So all of a sudden the Croats were not referred to as the Croats, but they were referred as the Ustashas, because he wanted to threaten the Serbs who live in Croatia with that what happened in the World War II. It was a very cheap trick, but it worked. So what happened actually was, all those territories in red you see, which were heavily populated by the Serbs, there was a rebellion against the Croatian authorities. So they became slowly controlled by the Serbs, and then by default controlled by Slobodan Milosevic, because all the people who were actually in charge of those territories were controlled by the Slobodan Milosevic himself or by the Secret Service of Serbia, so-called Državna bezbednost, which was controlled by Slobodan Milosevic. My presentation will be about Vukovar. Vukovar is this beautiful city in eastern Slavonia. As you see from the map, the border between Serbia and Croatia there is by the Danube River. So it is the most eastern part of Croatia, where the population was predominantly Croats, with a huge minority of the Serbs, but there are also some other ethnicities. Historically Hungarians, because in history the territory also belonged to Hungary. There were the Czechs and Slovaks as well, for that sake, because Bata, it was the Bata shoe company, built a company which is then called Borovo, but it was actually Bata shoe company, where many Czechs and Slovaks moved into the territory. And of course there were gypsies and other minorities living in the region. But the two minorities, the minority was the Croats, and the huge majority was Croats, but the huge minority were the Serbs. For those who didn't go through the war, and I hope most of them, I would like to bring you mentally into the war, and I'm using the analogies for that, and I'm apologizing for the Croatian authorities here, because I used in my previous presentation one analogy. It didn't work that well. I didn't mean anything bad with this. There's a bit of song from Ozzy Osbourne, and just because of the lyrics. Because of the lyrics. But I want to say here this. When you look out of the windows, here, I just took the picture here. This is what you see, beautiful country. This is where you live in, right? You don't expect to look differently. This is what you see every day. Maybe you don't see it because it's so beautiful, you get used to it. This is what the Croats saw in 1991. Danube River, castle, beautiful city. They are the same people as you, as me, as you. All the same people. They have their own problems, they have their families, they had the houses with the mortgages, they had the cars that they had to pay for. The kids were going to school, the same. The Croats and the Serbs living in a territory were exactly the same as us, as the two of us. Then, in August 1991, the war broke out in the former Yugoslavia. The war broke out in Vukovar. Slovenia was the episode. I'm not minimizing it, but it was an episode. The real war in Europe after World War II actually was in Vukovar. The same city that you saw in the picture in 3 months looked like this. The complete devastation. Why? The conflicting parties in that was the Croatian defenders, about 1,800 of them, 1,800 of them, were defending the city. There was 36,000 of the Yugoslav army and the Serbian paramilitaries, which were trying to conquer the city. In that conflict, the Yugoslav army didn't want to go fighting house by house, so they decided to shell the city, indiscriminately shell the city by the artillery. This is the result of it. They basically devastated in 3 months that beautiful place called Vukovar and turned it into rubble. And I like to be careful with the analogy. You know, you have two parties of the conflict, the Serbs and Croats, who were fighting over the city. On 18th of November, the Croats were not able to defend the city anymore, and they surrendered. They surrendered to the Serbs, surrendered to the Yugoslav army, not to the Serbs, the Yugoslav army, which was supposed to be a federal army, which had the obligation under the Geneva Conventions, to protect everybody who surrendered. So their obligation was to protect the people that surrendered the weapons. Now the situation is the one part of the population won, the Serbs, and one part of the population lost. And you see both in this video. It's a short video that I would like to present just for you to understand the situation in Vukovar on the 18th of November 1991. Important for the story. They are the same people as us. They are not different people. They are the same people as every single one of us. Pay attention to those people. I will talk about them later. This particular group, this lady and the people around. So you have two groups, clearly distinguished two groups. One in misery, trying to save their lives, and one celebrating. Now those who understand Serbo-Croatian, you know, the gang that actually walked with the black flags, they were singing songs about slaughtering Croats for dinner. Is that right? Is the correct translation?
There will be meat will butcher the Croats.
Yeah, yeah. So this is this atmosphere, you know, in 18th of November. On 18th, the Croats, the government, Yugoslav army, and the European community agreed on evacuation. So during the time, the Yugoslav army was going around in the city with the amplifiers and saying that everybody should go to Vukovar hospital, which will be used for evacuation. So many people that you saw actually were heading to the hospital for the evacuation. And then the Yugoslav army said that it wasn't safe to do it on the 19th. So they postponed the evacuation on the 20th in the morning. So the convoy was heading towards the Vukovar hospital. And they got on a bridge across the Vuka river, which is down here. And this is what you see the scene here. It's Major Slivančanin. He was a counterintelligence officer of the army who stopped the convoy at the bridge. The person next to him is Mr. Bosinger, who is from here, who was a Red Cross representative. And there was an argument about going to the hospital. He said it was agreed that we are going to go to the hospital. And Slivančanin says, no, it's dangerous, they are still shooting, we cannot let you in. And they were arguing between, and then Bosinger says, look, there's another bridge. You see where the arrows are going. It's visible. And he said, look, I see the the trucks coming. And he said, well, if you don't like it here, just go somewhere else. He just basically told him, if you don't like it here, to go somewhere else where you like it. So basically pushed the departure of the convoy to the hospital, and they were held at the bridge for some time. And why that happened was because they brought about 5 buses to the hospital at the back door and selected approximately 300 people, mostly men, 2 women, put them on the buses and drove them to the Yugoslav barracks, which were on the southern part of the city, where they were kept for some time. And they were doing triage, they were going through it, and some people were picked and were returned back to the hospital. Most of them were the hospital staff, and they were released eventually. Those people who were in the buses in the afternoon were driven to the Ovčara, which is a small village about 5 kilometers south from Vukovar, where is a pig farm. It was a huge agriculture area. The buses stopped in front of the hangar. Everybody had to go out. They were indiscriminately beaten, by the Serbian paramilitaries. Some of the people were killed on the spot through the beatings, and they kept them in a hangar until the night. Now, and I will continue the story, but I will diverse a little bit now. We were asking ourselves, why it happened, and then we learned why it happened from the witnesses, from the Serbs, when we interviewed during the conflict, during the investigation of the conflict. On the 20th November, at the same time when Slovan China was holding the people at the bridge, the Yugoslav media ran the story that Croats, now this is a team, I'm sorry for using the thing, that lost the battle, right? Slaughtered 40 children, killed 40 Serbian children. Now, I use the video before you to understand that. You have a very emotional situation where one group won and second lost. And into that emotional situation, you send the story that those people who lost kill children of those that won the conflict. It's lethal. This is absolutely lethal. Because Reuters picked that story and ran it globally. All the media in former Yugoslavia were running the same story. See, those Ustašas, the Croats, slaughtered 40 of our children. The story was completely fabulated. It wasn't true. They eventually backed off from it, but it was too late for the people at Ovčara. My first experience with the former Yugoslavia was in Sarajevo. I spent 1 year as a part of the UNPROFOR. And I was living in Sarajevo in Holiday Inn hotel for some time. And there was a little boy that was every morning there begging for batteries for his Walkman. For the young part of the audience here, Walkman was like iPad with the batteries, So he had a Walkman, he didn't have a batteries for it, and he was begging, not only to me, but everybody was coming to the hotel for the batteries. And I said, you promised this and you promised that, and every morning I told him, I'll buy you the batteries, and every morning I forgot it. And so the next morning he was there again and again. And then something happened really, that was my first direct exposure to the war.
But Sarajevo has yet to enjoy full peace. Unpredictable sniper fire continues to be a daily menace, even on the tramway system. And since mid-November, the number of rocket and mortar attacks into built-up areas has increased dramatically.
As everybody knows, that around the Holiday Inn is the most dangerous part of town. The other dangerous part is Dobrinja and area around the airport.
Meanwhile, the terror on the streets continues unabated, and the number of deaths and injuries is again.
That's him. He was gunned down. And I still get emotional about that because it was my first experience with the conflict. The boy that begged me every day for the battery, and I kind of forgot about the batteries whenever I left the hotel. I didn't understand why somebody, and I still don't understand, why somebody would shoot a child. Until many years later, I listened to the story before, how the Bosniaks were throwing the Serbian children to the cages to feed the lions. It's much easier to justify. You shoot to kill the kids from the other side if those throwing your own kids to the cages, to the lions. I have a third example of the lethal propaganda, which is this. This article was printed in Bosnia and Herzegovina by Republika Srpska. And you see an orphan crying on the grave of the parents, of his parents. Those parents were killed by the Bosniaks in Srebrenica, in the area of Srebrenica. If you actually look at that, the paintings was painted in 19th century by Uroš Predić. And they used the painting as a black and white picture. And they broadcast this, printed that, in Bosnia and Herzegovina during the conflict around Srebrenica. See, the Bosniaks are killing the Serbian parents of this poor child. Again, completely fabulated story. Now, where I'm heading with this, there's always a propaganda in every war. The Milosevic's propaganda. And Milosevic, I'm saying because I don't think it was him actually who was behind that directly, but it was the machinery that was actually under his control, was running these stories. These are very basic instincts that we all have. We are children of somebody, or we are parents of a children. It's very emotional and very strong bond between children and the parents. And if you run stories like this, it's justification for killing the others much easier. It took 20 years for the Serbian radio television to publish the apology for using this propaganda in the territories of the former Yugoslavia. 20 years later, they apologized for that. It was 10 years after Milosevic was pretty much gone from the former Yugoslavia. It took some 10 years after that. I'll go back to Ovčara, if I may. Those people from the hangar were eventually put on the trucks, 20 by 20, and they were taken during the night somewhere. What about the Yugoslav army? The Yugoslav army brought them there. They had the obligation to protect those people. Even if they were war criminals, they had the obligation to protect them, maybe prosecute them, but they were not war criminals. Most of those people actually were the Croatian citizens from Vukovar, 2 women among those. The Yugoslav army decided to pull out of this. In the evening, General Mrksić, at the time Colonel Mrksić, who was a commander of the Yugoslav army in the area, ordered the Yugoslav army to pull out of that hangar and left the Croats in the hands of the Serbian paramilitaries from the region. And they were taking them 20 by 20 into the darkness. They used a bulldozer, dug a big hole at the place where before the war it was used for burying the dead animals from the pig farm. And they shot them and threw them into the ditch, 20 by 20. And then Zdenko Novak come into picture. Zdenko Novak was one of them. He was in a hangar, he was beaten, he was on the truck going for the execution. He didn't know where he was going, but he was smart enough to think, where would they be taking us during the night? He's talking to a colleague of his like this, and he says, let's jump. And he says, you stupid, they are killers. He says, what do you think are going to do to us? They are going to kill us anyway, let's jump. He said, no. So Zdenko jumped out of the truck and ran through the cornfields, and eventually was caught by the Serbs. But with a name like this, he could be easily Serb, Czech, Slovak. So he managed to get to Zagreb. And then he actually was the one with the closest information about where the mass grave could possibly be, because he was already on the way. Everybody else who was on that truck and all the previous trucks ended up in the mass grave. Everybody was killed from the hangar 265 people were murdered at that night, dumped in a ditch, covered, and the Serbs then left, thinking that it will never be discovered. Zdenko Novak got himself into Zagreb and talked to Clyde Snow. Those of you who know Indiana Jones movies, he was the character that the Indiana Jones movies were made of. He is a well-known anthropologist, forensic anthropologist from the United States, from Texas. And he was working, for example, on Mengele identification, on Tutankhamun, also the Oklahoma bombing. So the UN actually sent him to former Yugoslavia at the early days as a part of the Mazowiecki Commission to investigate for the Secretary General what happened in the former Yugoslavia. So he got himself to Zagreb and he talked to Zdenko Novak. Zdenko Novak told him the story. And then he took a map and looked at the map and identified the place where the grave should be or could be. And he actually sat there to find the grave. Now, as an investigator, if you look at the place, there's a grave there somewhere. Where do you think where the grave is? Where is it? Is it here? Or here? Or maybe here, right? Or here? You know, if you don't know where the grave is, it's very difficult to find it. You know, it's just all the movies that you watch about how easy things, go like this. In reality, it doesn't work like this. You know, you just cannot go across the field and dig, everywhere you think it might be. Zdenko Novak's testimony was absolutely critical for identification of the grave. The grave was here. When they came there in 1992 actually, when they got there, this is what they found. There was a skeleton on the top of it. It had like a necklace chain with a Catholic cross and a small tag which says Boki Hrvati, which means the God and the Croats. So very unlikely a Serb would have something like that on his neck. So they thought that it's good indication that the person is Croat. They tried to do the exhumation on the site. They did the first test digging, and then the Serbs came there and they basically told them not to exhume it, and they didn't give the permission. So from 1992 until 1996, the grave was guarded by the Russian Umprofor soldiers. Now in Croatia, it was believed that because the Serbs and the Russians were always historically close, that the Russian soldiers will allow the Serbs to dig the grave, so that when international community comes there, nothing will be found. So when we were actually preparing the exhumation, there was very little people to believe us that we will actually find something there. There was a big skepticism in Croatia about this. We work with the NGOs for doing the investigation phase. Mothers of Vukovar were very close, cooperating with us because we were trying to help to find their loved ones because they disappeared. And then the thought was at the time that they might be actually in Serbia or Kosovo in the mines where they'll be working, in the camps. So nobody really wanted to believe that they'll be dead. They had these false hopes about finding them somewhere. 1993, the UN, based on the findings of the Mazowiecki Commission, decided to establish the International War Crimes Tribunal. And I have a short video by our country lady, Secretary Albright. I'm talking about country lady because she's Czech, even though she was American Secretary of State. She testified in one of the proceedings in The Hague about the establishment of the tribunal. And I don't think many people saw the testimony. I took only about 2 minutes from it. It's very telling about what were the expectations of the ICTY at the beginning.
I'd like to turn your attention to the issue of another matter you touched on, and that is the creation of the tribunal. Could you share with the judges why the member states of the United Nations voted for the creation of a tribunal, what the concerns were, what issues it hoped to address, what goals it hoped to achieve?
Well, I think that all of the people that were involved in it, the permanent representatives, in the Security Council as well as the non-permanent ones, and others who were not on the Security Council were very much aware that we were involved in something new, though discussing the Nuremberg precedents, that this was not a war of victors, that we were really dealing with a situation that was ongoing, that the procedures had to be established that would not only identify individual guilt and expunge the collective guilt, but make sure that proper punishment was meted out. And it was, in many ways, being present at the creation of a brand new organization. I must say that we ran into a great deal of skepticism. It was easy enough to take the first vote in February to get the tribunal created, but nobody really believed that it would work. There were questions about how the judges would be selected. I must say that especially the women permanent representatives at the United Nations wanted to make sure that there would be women judges, because so many of the crimes had been committed against women in terms of rape and horrendous crimes. And so the judges were then selected by the entire UN system. And then the question was how to get a prosecutor, and that was very complicated, and nobody thought that would happen. And then nobody thought that there'd ever be a court that actually functioned, that would be set on what the precedents were going to be. And we then in May voted on how of 93, voted on how the procedures of the tribunal would work. And then still nobody thought it would work. They said that there never would be any indictees, and then they said there would never be any trials, and then they said there would never be any convictions, and there would never be any sentencing. And at each part along the way, I would point out that they were wrong. And one of the reasons that I think it is so important that this procedure is going forward is to show that they were all wrong, that that the tribunal is very much a part of the international judicial system that is playing a very essential role, I think, in making sure that this individual guilt is assigned, that punishment is meted out, and that there can be reconciliation. I think that was the whole purpose behind having such a tribunal, so that there could ultimately be the reconciliation of the various people that were innocent as a part of this.
I think it's a very telling story. The telling story says that nobody believed that the tribunal would work because it was an ongoing situation. You know, the Nuremberg and the Tokyo trials, in contrast, these were after the conflict. The superpowers control the territory. They can bring any witness they wanted, they can arrest whoever they wanted, and they prosecute whoever they wanted. You know, we were in a situation where we investigated people who were still in power. You know, in my case, Slobodan Milosevic. You know, in the team that I worked on the Serbian suspects, we were trying to investigate the president of the state, which was still in power. So he had no interest in cooperating with us, clearly. You know, and the teams which were working in Croatia and Bosnia were in the same situation. They were investigating the people who were still in power. So I think it's very telling. So I now move back to the realities of that. You know, we came on board. We indicted about 70 people. Not my team, but the whole office of the prosecutor. About 70 people were indicted. Nobody was arrested. Nobody was arrested. But what happened was, in our particular case, Ambassador Klein was put in charge of the UNTAES in eastern Slavonia, which was the UN administration that controlled the territory of Vukovar and the area around. And he was very pro-ICTY. So first thing what he actually organized for us was the exhumation at Ovčara. He ordered that it will happen. He put all the logistics in place, and the Belgian military who provided the security for us, because the territory was still controlled by the Serbian rebels, who had no interest of us collecting informational evidence against them. So we had a full protection there. They established a camp where the crime site was supposed to be, and then we came there. I spent 7 weeks as a lead investigator on that exhumation. You know what happened? They wanted to be so helpful to us, that they prepared the gravesite in such a splendid way. They took a bulldozer and cleaned the area for us, which was absolute disaster on the outset, because all the evidence which was on the surface was taken aside. So we had a saying when I was a kid. It's very difficult to translate that, but in Czech, it says, iniciativní blbec horší než střední nepřítel. That basically says that the people with the initiatives are worse than your enemies, in English. They really wanted to be helpful to us, but they caused us a lot of damage, because all the surface evidence, there were trees with the bullets, it will show us from which part they were shooting. It was all gone. It was a gravel. Nicely done. So we actually had a team which was there at the time, 1992. They came back with us. It was a physician for human rights. They were the people, experts, we brought there to do the exhumation. And we were trying to find the location of the grave. This way.
The grave edge is up there somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah. It could be.
So there's another string.
Is it going in the right direction?
Yeah.
Is it a meter apart?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So that should be it.
That should be it.
How far down below that?
It's 22 centimeters to the first piece of
On
clothing.
the string.
Yeah, which would be original Bronson.
This would mean to be in a quick split.
Yeah, well, we knew we had 7 meters to play with.
You see the black plastic?
I'm sorry, what?
That was put there in the grave in 1992 by the experts.
We did put plastic over everybody. Okay, good.
So in 1992, when they actually did the test digging and the Serbs pushed them back, they put on the surface in the test range the black plastic so that they can see whether somebody tampered with this. This is what we were looking for. We were looking for the plastic. So this is where we found the plastic. We actually found out that the grave was not removed illegally from that. And then we started the exhumation. Now it's again one of the disclaimers, you don't have to watch it. I will show you how the grave looked when we actually uncovered the soil from the grave. So if you don't want to watch it, there's a time not to look at that. This is how the grave looked. It's 200 people. It's 200 people. And I always say it's the same people as us. Not different people, the same people as us. What their guilt was, they ended up in a hospital on the 18th of November, 1991. And they were picked up by the regular army, not by the paramilitaries, by the regular Yugoslav army, who were taken away, and eventually, this is how they ended up. These are the people that we indicted for the crime. Mile Mrksic was the one who ordered the JNA to pull out. He was supposed to protect those people, but he ordered the army to pull out. The one on the right, Veselin Sevanchanin, you saw him there. He was the one saying, if you don't like it here, just go somewhere else. He was the one who stopped the convoy to go to the hospital. And the guy in between, Miroslav Radic, who was eventually acquitted, was the commander of the military police unit, or the platoon of the soldiers of the Yugoslav army who transported the people from the hospital to Ovčara. And then you have this gang here. There was 18 of them, which we found out based on the ammunition that we found at the grave. We found out there was 18 shooters based on the ammunition. We used the American law enforcement, ATF, it's called law enforcement. They actually did the examination of the ammunition for us. Nobody in Europe was able to process so many rifle cartridges. And I only have few photographs, but this woman in the middle, that's the one we were celebrating there. She was actually the only woman who was part of the shooting squad that actually was shooting the people at Ovčara. And Slavko Rokmanovic, I'll be talking about him. Slavko Rokmanovic was the mayor of Vukovar. He didn't belong to this group of the shooters, but we had evidence that he came to Ovčara based on the testimonies, and he actually was beating the people who were there detained. So, as I said, 70 people indicted, nobody in a prison. So at the time, Justice Goldstone, who was the prosecutor, of the ICTY decided to start doing something which is called secret indictment, sealed indictment. They were indictments which were not made public, and the reason for that was, his argument was, if nobody's arresting, there's no point of publicly indicting, because we will achieve nothing. But if we indict the people without them knowing, it will give us the opportunity to approach them and maybe try to arrest them, rather than, because they wouldn't be defending themselves, because they wouldn't know that they are indicted. So Slavko Dokmanovic was one of those who we indicted under sealed, so he didn't know. And it was always a very small group of people who actually knew that these people were indicted. There was a judge, the prosecutor, the deputy prosecutor, the lawyer, and the team. So even the teams within the office of the prosecutor didn't know that these people were indicted. So in December, I'm having coffee with a colleague who was working on other team. She just came from Belgrade. She was working on the crimes committed by Croats against the Serbs. We're having coffee, and she said, I just came from Belgrade. I said, we would love to go to Belgrade, but we just can't get there. And so who did you talk to? And then she said, I talked to blah, 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 Slavko Dokmanovic. And I was like, you talked to Dokmanovic? Yeah, we want to interview him as a witness. And I said, do you have a contact details for him? And she said, yeah, I've got a telephone and an address. I said, can I have it? Yeah, no problem. So she gave me the address and the telephone number. And I go to a lawyer, Clint Williamson, who you saw there in the tracksuits, and the exhumation. I said, Clint, listen, there might be a possibility for us to arrest Dokmanovic. And he just looked at me, he's like, yeah, right. And I said, no, I'm serious. He said, how do you want to do it? I said, well, I think, we can trick him to go to Hungary or to Eastern Slavonia, which was under control, and then pretend that we are interviewing him as a witness for our inquiry, and we could pretend that we are from the other team. He said, but we don't know where he lives. And I just pull out of the pocket the telephone and the address, and I said, well, this is where he is. And I told him the story. So he took me to the director of investigation, and then we went together to see the prosecutor. At the time, it was only Louise Arbour as a prosecutor. And we were lucky in that sense, because Louise Arbour, before she became prosecutor, she actually went to Ovčara. So she visited the site at the exhumation. So she actually saw her own eyes what happened there. For her, it was not a case. For her, it was the case where she actually saw. So we explained her the story, and then she said, what is the danger in it? And Clint told her, somebody can get killed. Nobody tested it. It was for the first time that something like that will be done. And then I see, like today, we were sitting around the table, and she's sitting there, and then it was quiet, just the air conditioning going. And she just looked at us, and she says, "You gotta try. If nobody else wants to do it, no, we have to try ourselves." And she put together a team, which was Clint as a lawyer. There were two British investigators, Kevin Curtis and Dennis Milner, and myself. We were tasked in trying to set up a sting operation where we would attract him across the border to Hungary, but possibly to Eastern Slavonia, where we had a jurisdiction, to arrest Slavko Dokmanovic. We worked on that for 6 months. It's a long story, I cannot bother you with that, but it's in the book. Actually, it's a big part of the book is the Operation Little Flower, because it was absolutely unique operation. We managed eventually to get him across the border, and then under pretext, he initially agreed to go, and then he decided not to go because he was afraid of Croats. Because the Croats were for him the enemies, not us, because he didn't know that he was indicted. So he asked for a guarantee that the Croats wouldn't arrest him, which we gladly gave him. Because we wouldn't lie to him, because we had no intention to give him to Croats. We wanted to show the world that it can be done. And giving him to Croats would not serve no good to us. So we could guarantee him that he would not be arrested by the Croats. So we put together, not yet. We put together the operation. 6 months work, long story. Now what you will see is the actual arrest. He came across the border. we needed him to actually cross the Serbian border because we didn't have the authority to operate in Serbia. So what we needed was actually he crossed the Serbian border on the bridge over the Danube, where he had a VIP escort. And the escort was supposed to take him to General Klein because Dokmanovic wanted to negotiate sale of his house, because he had a house in Trpinja in eastern Slavonia that he couldn't sell and he couldn't live there because it was controlled by Croat government. So he wanted to sell the house. So we set up for him a meeting between Ambassador Klein so that he can discuss the sale of the house. So he crossed the border, he walked into the VIP escort, and they took him to meet General Klein.
Vladimír Dzuro. I'm an investigator of the office of the prosecutor of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia.
Gospodin Dokmanović, ja se zovem Vladimír Dzuro, ja sam istražitelj iz Ureda tužitelja Međunarodnog krivičnog suda za bivšu Jugoslaviju.
You are charged in an indictment and named in an arrest warrant issued by the tribunal.
Vi se teretite u optužnici i vaše ime je navedeno u nalogu za hapšenje koji je izdao Međunarodni krivični sud.
You are charged with the grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions, crimes against humanity, and violations of the laws or customs of war for your role in the beatings and killings which occurred at Ovčara farm near Vukovar on the 20th of November 1991. Do you understand?
Optuženi ste za teške povrede Ženevske konvencije, zločine protiv čovječnosti, kršenje ratnih zakona i ratnih običaja zbog vaše uloge u tučenju i ubijanju na farmi Ovčara u blizini Vukovara 20. oktobra 1991. godine. Da li ste razumjeli ovo što vam je rečeno?
Razumeo sam, ali to nije istina.
I understood, but it's not true.
We'll transport this.
Yeah, okay.
To po raz pierwszy. Znaki by to musi być.
Completely untested, unprecedented. So we had him. It was exciting, for me personally and for the team. Actually, the reading the rights for the first time after Nuremberg was honored doing that. And you didn't see the whole thing. I cut it because then I'm actually reading the indictment. So I cut it short. It's about 15 minutes long. That's not the point. So we go with him. We go to Chepin. Chepin actually was on the free territory of Croatia at the time. So there was an airport, and there was a Belgian Air Force plane waiting for us. Pre-negotiated takeoff, all these things, because the plane was used by General Klein. All pre-negotiated. We got there. The Khmer had a hood over his head because we were afraid when we crossed to the Croatian territory that the Croatian police will recognize him and it will create a problem. So, we were in a convoy going to the airport, no problem. We got out of the car. There was a medical and the health to see that he wasn't injured by us, all good. And then the situation, we have an airplane, then us there, and then the SWAT team around us, heavily armed, with the flak jacks, machine guns and helmets and everything. And then about 3 Croatian policemen showed up from the airport, and they wanted to see who that guy was. And we were telling them, we are not going to tell you who the guy is. Very quickly, the permission to take off was revoked. And then we were standing in the middle of it. About 40 degrees Celsius, everybody nervous, the SWAT team around us with all the guns that they needed, but no jurisdiction because it was free territory, Croatian free territory. They have zero jurisdiction on that. And those 3 Croatian policemen with the handguns that couldn't physically overpower the Polish, but with a jurisdiction on the territory. And then we were in a situation where we were afraid that the problems will be in Serbia, not in Croatia. We were afraid that if anything goes wrong anywhere, it's going to be in Vojvodina where he lived, or on the transport, or somewhere, but not on the free territory. So it was a standoff between us, who is the guy, we are not going to tell you, and the Croatian police. And then eventually, Clint Williamson telephoned the Deputy Prime Minister, who we knew from the exhumation, which was the year before, and explained him the situation. And then it was Ivica Kostovic. And then he basically handed over the telephone to the police. And shortly after, we got a sign from the captain of the airplane saying, we got permission to take off. So we all went to the airplane. They shut the door. Everybody stressed out. We sat there, and then the airplane took off. And the task was to get out of the airspace of Croatia. Because anytime the Croatian air control would order the plane to go back, they will have to go back. Even though it's a military plane, they will have to obey. So we wanted to get outside of the territory. For very good reason, because we didn't want Dokmanovic to end up in the Croatian hands. Because the whole purpose of that operation was to bring him to The Hague, to show the international community that it can be done. So off we are, over Hungary, and we are flying home. Everybody happy. We thought, good. On the plane, Dokmanovic was given the indictment in Serbian, and he asked for his bag, which was in the custody of Kevin Curtis. And Kevin said, I'm not going to give it to you. Give me the indictment. So he put the indictment in. Shortly after that, I need to smoke. No, you can't smoke on the plane. I'm sick, I need to smoke. So we asked the pilot, he said, it's okay. So Kevin offered a cigarette to him, and he says, no, you tricked me, because Kevin was the one who actually went to trick him, to bring him across the border. I'm not going to smoke your cigarettes, I want my cigarettes, they're in the bag, give me the bag. I said, no. Eventually he smoked Kevin's cigarette. When we flew to Falkenberg Air Base in close to The Hague. We were taken by the police to the prison. We walked to the prison, and then we handed him over. We started to hand over his personal belongings. So first what he has in his pocket, and then what was in the bag. So Kevin, being good British policeman who never had a gun in his hand, put a hand into the bag and pulled a revolver, Zastava, loaded. Now, Dokmanovic actually had the gun with him, and he wanted to get the bag in an airplane because he would be the only armed person on that aircraft. I'm joking, we work for peace, so we are not armed. And then the pilot was busy with the piloting the aircraft. So had Kevin give him the bag, he would be the only person armed on that aircraft. Anyway, we got there, and then very quickly there was a proceedings about the legality of the arrest, which is absolutely critical, because of course the defense counsel that was engaged with Dokmanovic argued that we kidnapped him. And those whole proceedings on it, our argument was that he actually voluntarily went to sell his house. He never asked for the guarantee that we would not arrest him. He only asked for the guarantee that Croats wouldn't. And Croats didn't arrest him. Eventually, the decision was made by Justice MacDonald that trickery can be used to get the criminals from the territory which is not under your control on the territory which is under your control under one important conditions. As soon as you put the hands on them, you need to provide them with a due process. This verdict is still standing. That was used as a precedent, in other cases. It was actually the breakthrough, in the arrest operation, but also legally, that internationally, trickery can be used under certain conditions. Why so important? Why the whole thing is so important? If you look at that, Richard Goldstone signed the indictment 26th of March 1996 under seal. Then we started work on the operation. On the 27th of June 1997, we actually arrested Dokmanovic. In the situation where NATO was saying, we don't have a mandate to arrest the war criminals in the Bosnia-Herzegovina, because our mandate is, after Dayton, implement the peace, I4, and stabilize the situation, S4. So their argument was that when they start arresting, the local population will turn against NATO, which will destabilize the situation, right? And the countries from the former Yugoslavia who were supposed to cooperate with us and arrest, the Serbs would arrest Croats, but not the Serbs. So if they arrest Croats, they will be accused of arresting all the others. The same in Croatia. The arrest Serbs were not the problem, but the arrest the Croats was politically impossible. So it was a standoff situation. It was a basically no-go for the countries in the former Yugoslavia, and NATO was saying, we don't have a mandate. So after this, 2 weeks later, this is where Louis Arbour went to NATO and says, my team of those guys, handful basically, managed to arrest a war criminal. Nobody got injured. There was no real appraisal, with the Serbs. There was a few demonstrations, but it was it. So we can do it on our own. You have 60,000 troops in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and you are telling that it's impossible. So 2 weeks later, the SAS, the British SAS, under the umbrella of NATO, went to Prijedor, where there was 3 sealed indictments against the Prijedor 3 for genocide. They arrested one. The other one was stupid enough to put up, so they shot him dead. And the third one ran away to Serbia, and he was hiding for a number of years, and eventually was arrested by the Serbs and extradited to the tribunal. So this picture shows how important the arrest of Slavko Dokmanovic was. He was not the biggest war criminal in the conflict, but he was somebody who we managed to arrest and show the world that it can be done. And unfortunately, he didn't go through the whole proceedings because he committed suicide about 10 days before the verdict. It's another lecture about this because he put up with the alibi, and we managed to prove that alibi was false. And so he ended up basically with all the witnesses who testify for him under oath, not telling the truth, that the prosecution argued that all those testimonies should be written off, because if you lie once under oath, it means that you can't be trusted. So 10 days before the verdict, he actually hanged himself in the cell. So for us, it meant we had to go through the whole proceedings again. When we had Mrksic and Slivančan and Radic, we had to do the whole trial from the scratch because there was no verdict. For us, it was important. The verdict was important for us because we wanted to prove that it actually happened, the crime, regardless of who was responsible. But the verdict would mean that the crime happened, and then we will prosecute the people based on the existing precedents of the verdict. But because there was no verdict, we had to go through the whole thing from the scratch. We managed eventually get Slivančan and Mrksic. Mrksic got 20 years. Slivančan got 10 years in prison, and Radic was acquitted. Now I'll show you something which is also not so often seen. It's the arrest of Slobodan Milošević. The same guy who was working on me, Kevin Curtis, actually arrested Milošević on behalf of the tribunal. After he was arrested by the local authorities in Serbia, Kevin took him over from the Serbian authorities and transported him to The Hague. This is actually filmed at the Camp Eagle in Tuzla. This is where he is under the authority of the US military.
Any other medications, any other symptoms? And that is nice for Mr. Interesting Kids. Have you ever used this nitroglycerin? No.
I took about 2 minutes of the video. It's a long video. Because in the book, there's a whole chapter given to Kevin Curtis about the story of arresting Milosevic. It's not that well-known story. Dokmanovic actually is more known because it was run through the media. The arrest of Milosevic, the fact that he was arrested by the local authorities in Serbia is known fact, and there was a lot of footage about that. But this footage, we got it just recently, and we need to cover the faces of the American soldiers as well, so it's a technical issue with this, so that we actually can use it for anything. So I'm getting to the end of my presentation, which is about the investigating war crimes. The book has much more details. If you are interested in that, it not talks only about this, but also talks about the investigation of Arkan that I was working on. It also talks about the investigation of the Serbs in Ukraine. It's Goran Hadžić, Martic, and Babic. I was the one who persuaded Babic to surrender to the tribunal. It was after he was expelled back to Serbia, after the Croats took over the territory. He became, for Serbs he was a traitor, and for Croats he was an enemy. So he had no place to go, so he turned to the tribunal, and I was the one who persuaded him to cooperate. It's described in the book. So if you are interested in the investigation of the war crimes, that's all true story as I saw it. But it's not memoirs, it's actually a book about the work, not necessarily about me. It's about my colleagues. There's a Czech prosecutor who has a chapter because she actually prosecuted Milan Martic for the crimes. So there's another chapter on that. So one more thing I have to do because my permission to talk to you publicly from the United Nations is only to promote my book. So I need to promote my book. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, please.
Thank you very much, and I think we will have some questions before we go next door for some refreshments. I think we all need a drink probably, but let's give ourselves some time to have some questions, please. And if you could say just a few words of introduction.
Thank you very much. My name is Alina Matković. I'm the Minister from the mission of Croatia. You have certainly stirred a lot of emotions in my soul, because I really had to live this in Zagreb. Fortunately, or compared to what people in Vukovar had to live, I was very fortunate because I only had to run to the cellar every night with air raids and so on. So this is nothing, peanuts really. Thank you very much for your efforts, because works like yours are a good basis for, as you said, creating a sound society. Although we still are very much marked, because we still have 1,019 92 persons missing, and I think unless all the people are found, it would be difficult to create a stable environment. I just have two additional information to what you said and a question. When you spoke about the Declaration of Independence in the different republics voted for, I just wanted to remind that in Eastern Slavonia, which was totally multi-ethnic, it was very funny how villages were like clustered. You know, there were Croatian, Serbian, Czech, Hungarian. And the funny thing was that all those national minorities, we have 22 in our constitution nowadays, all apart from the Serbian, they all voted for independence of Croatia. So this is something, it doesn't go only, you know, between Macedonians, Montenegrins, but it goes only within one republic. And to add to what you said to propaganda, this is very true. I remember that we had a very good TV show in the evening, which it was called Picture or Picture, and they tried to provide different media coverage of each event, what happened during the day. How these coverage were different, this is amazing, you know. Each republic showed the same event which happened even before the war started in a totally different way. So no wonder that an ordinary, uneducated person who had no access to real facts would take a rifle and say, okay, come on, I have to defend myself. So, I mean, and it went not only towards these drastic events, but I have a very good friend who is Serbian from Vojvodina, the northern part, and she was watching TV and immediately gave me a ring and said, look, all our people, all the refugees coming to Serbia, they are all showing their ID cards and they all have number 33 as their ID number, apart from, you know, the name of the date when you are born, because this is a longer figure. And then I took out immediately my card. I said, but look, this is what I have, and I'm not Serbian. And the matter of fact was that each republic was assigned in former Yugoslavia a number. So everybody born and living in Croatia had these 33. But you know, if you use the propaganda very well, this is how you stir bad emotions. This is why I have difficulty when somebody talking about journalists say, no, they are never, they are no responsible. There are no responsibility. But at times like this, their responsibility is immense.
Agree.
So, you know, I was posted in UNESCO before, and we had these discussions. So with Dunja Mijatović and so on, I said, look, I mean, there are no angels difficult to have angels in such times. I have a question. I mean, I don't have a personal information about, but we heard that when countries were providing material for the court, and you also provided your evidence, but we all know that when documents were provided, like Serbia had this deal that they were allowed, the only one, to provide documents with certain information black. So how difficult would it be in this situation when you have one stakeholder, to put it mildly, who was allowed, or who negotiated this deal to provide such evidence which is not 100% evidence at the same level as the others? How do you explain that?
I can't explain it. I should tell one thing. When I was there, we got no information from Serbia. So when I left in 2004, seriously, we had no cooperation. You know, it was very difficult to get anything out of the Serbian authorities. Even the Milosevic was gone. You know, the cooperate, because there was also the army which was involved in these things, and the police. So we struggled to get any information at all. After I left, I really don't know what happened there, but we were struggling with any documentary evidence. What I know from the proceedings before the court, that some documentary evidence was received, But I cannot talk about that because I wasn't there anymore. So I'm trying to run away from the answer. But I left 2004, and so whatever happened after that, I just don't know, and I don't want to misspoke on things. So my apologies for that.
No, I mean it's.
Any other question?
Maybe the ambassador.
Maybe thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for all the job you have done so far on behalf of the international community. I have one question. When we watched the video and we watched the imprisonment of the former mayor of Vukovar, all the policemen, all the soldiers were in a hood, with the one exception. It was you. You were the only identifiable on the picture. So my question is, given that the job you have performed didn't make you a lot of friends, have you ever witnessed or experienced blackmail or whatever, or some harassment on your person because you were in extremely dangerous region, dealing with extremely potential, powerful, and also dangerous people? So what gave you a confidence that you can move on, that you can further prosecute? Because I'm sure that you were targeted by many circles, regardless of the part of former Yugoslavia.
The thing is that it's a good question. People ask me, are you afraid when you wrote the book that somebody will go after you? If you do this job, you have to expect that something might not happen, or might happen to you. You can't do it, like the operation, the little flower, as we call it. The whole thing was completely untested. Anything could happen to any of us, not only to me, but to any of us. If you approach it from the point that something can happen to me, then you will never do anything. You need to take the risks. But if you look at the policemen here and back home, every day they're exposed, to same thing. Look at the SWAT teams, URNA, all those people who are used, for the dangerous criminals. Now they expose themselves, every day. My facial exposure, I had a hair. I always like it. I had a hair. People don't recognize me anymore. But on serious note, I didn't look at that from that perspective. And for the first time there actually happened something to me, funny enough, was not when I was working for the War Crimes Tribunal, but when I was working for this office. I was in the Middle East in one country and I was taken hostage. And I cannot talk about it because it's not a part of the permission that I have to discuss, publicly. But I was taken by a group which is believed to be a terrorist group as a hostage for investigation that I was conducting to less important thing that the war crimes in former Yugoslavia. And so nobody expected at the time that we will get exposed as such. So back to the question, in the former Yugoslavia I didn't get exposed to any personal danger. When I worked later in this office, I actually went through a traumatic situation which was not related to the war crimes. But I still wouldn't change the job. I love this job. It's if you like investigation, if you like the justice, you just need to put up with this.
Maybe just a little final remark. You had such a poetic name as Little Flower, operations like that, dealing with the criminals. You were smiling and so on. So it's striking. It's a very contrasting image in relation to agenda that you have performed an investigation you have conducted.
Do you know where the Little Flower comes from?
I have no idea. How could you make up this name?
Little Flower. Mayor of New York, LaGuardia, was nicknamed Little Flower. And then we were looking for the code name for the operation. So this lawyer from our team, Clint Williamson, came with the idea that we will use the Little Flower, not because of LaGuardia, but he was mayor, and Doc Marek was also mayor. So that's why we called the operation Little Flower. And then it was unknown until much later, when the information about the arrest actually came out. Then people started talking about the Little Flower. But it comes from LaGuardia.
Thank you.
Do you mind if I take a picture of you? Any object that I take a picture of you? Because for me it's very unique to be here in the room of Justice Kasese and have such a nice audience. So you don't mind. Now you can ask questions. I have no problem. So if you don't mind. Thank you.
So any question with me? You had your hands up for some time. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Cara. I'm working for the Quaker United Nations Office on Peace and Disarmament. Thanks very much for this really fascinating talk. In terms of best practice, I was wondering if you could give any examples of transitional justice processes, including yours or any others, which you think have successfully done any of the following. So address the root causes of the conflict, provided accountability for crimes during the conflict, and or provided a roadmap for sustainable peace in the future. And then just a short question as well. You might not be able to comment on this, but you mentioned the suicide of the man that you arrested. I'm also thinking of the suicide of Slobodan Ovčara in 2017, literally on camera at the ICTY. How are these sorts of suicides possible, considering the amount of surveillance and searches that usually these people are under?
Okay, I'll start with the end. If somebody wants to kill himself or herself, they'll find a way how to do it. As simple as that. You live in a normal life. The prisoners are normal people. You don't live in this ideal situation. Unfortunately, things like that happen. You just can't 100% prevent it. There were maybe mistakes on the way by different people, but you just can't prevent. If somebody, like Dr. Malivers tried to kill himself several times, eventually he managed. He wanted to kill himself. So that's the answer to your question. You can't prevent people from killing each other. They will find a way. How it was conducted in a courtroom, it was very dramatic and very unfortunate. So that was it. Now talking about the successful operations, I will use the Ovčara, which not everybody might agree that it was a successful operation. My Croatian colleagues here might not actually look at that from the point, but I still believe it was successful to some point. When I was still working for the tribunal, Karel Ponte, the prosecutor at the time, was talking about transferring some of those cases to the local courts. And so we investigated the Ovčara not only from the responsibility of the commanding structure, but also about the shooters. But decision was made that this case would be turned over to the Serbian authorities, where they had the prosecutor for the war crimes. So based on the agreement between Karel Ponte and the Serbian authorities, the case was handed over for the prosecution in Serbia. And it was a dramatic thing because they were sentenced and they were released and then sentenced again, and different courts and appeals. Eventually, at least some of them were prosecuted for the war crimes. So it is a partial success. The trauma that the witnesses had to go through, it was terrible because they had to travel to Serbia to testify before the courts where nobody liked them. So it was very traumatizing. But they actually got prosecuted for the crimes, the actual shooters, for that. And some of them get quite a hefty sentences. So I believe it is a partially success because if you look at that 1993, 1994, nobody believed that anything will work. Nobody believed that a tribunal will work. So the fact that actually something was prosecuted locally from the thing what we did was a success. But if you live in the realities, again, you need to look at the things from the perspective of the realities. We don't live in an ideal world. If we live in an ideal world, there'll be no wars, because people would know that they get punished for that. If you live in an ideal world, people will not murder each other or rape each other, because they would know that they get punished for this. This is the same with the war crimes. This is the same things. What you have a rape, a murder, but on a huge scale. But the conduct is pretty much the same. Even the investigation is the same, only on a different scale. So I wished we lived in a world that we wouldn't kill each other. But we don't.
Please, in the back. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Diana. I'm at the Institute of Studying International Law. It was very interesting you mentioned the use of propaganda by media in your presentation. I was wondering, what would you say is the role of social media and people broadcasting live the horrors of the wars, of the conflict, and how is this information usable by investigators in conducting the materials research and maybe even as a material for later prosecution. So what is your
You know, social media didn't exist at the time of the war in former Yugoslavia. Everybody watched 7:30 news, or what is it, 7 or 7:30 news? 7:30 news? Like in Czechoslovakia. And what was fed by the government to them, there was the truth, even if it wasn't the truth. But I think our colleague here tell us how different stories could be presented in a different way. But the facts are the same, just the presentation. The social media is a new animal, and in very positive or very negative. I think what the problem we're facing, all of us, is we look at that very superficially on everything. You know, we all have these magic things, you know, where we get the headlines and you read like 4 lines and then you know the story. People generally look at don't look at the sources of this. And there are companies out there who try to manipulate us. You know, I don't want to be any specific, but they are out there that try to manipulate the media, the opinion of the people, from the commercials, you know, to political manipulations. And we need to be very careful about it. And it's about the critical thinking. You know, critical thinking of every single one of us is important. Because if you don't look at the sources of the information, if you don't superficially look at that, then that you get very easily manipulated. But it takes an effort. You know, the media, the social media will be all the time. When I start with the book in Czech Republic, they said you need to start using Facebook and Instagram, and I have to admit, you know, I had no experience with it. You know, now I'm fully in it because this is where I can promote my book. But this is innocent. You know, on these same platforms, people can promote other things. You have the clusters of the hate, as they call it. You know, now through the social media, you can actually group people together, not for the positive, but for the negative. So there's no. If there was a way out of it, somebody would have already come up with this. But I would like to say to everybody, be very careful. When you read news, look at the sources of it. This is the only prevention that I know of, that you can actually see whether it might be trusted or whether it could be completely untruthful, manipulative piece of information that somebody intentionally puts into your heads. And I don't have the solution for it. But the only thing, critical thinking, is something that we only had to learn. Especially with the overload of the information that we deal with now.
You had a question in the front.
Yes, thank you. Nicolas Marcinier, I was the ICRC delegate.
Oh, thank you very much for coming here.
I would like to bounce back off the before last question. And you were very clear about the difficulty for the witnesses to go to Serbia and testify. I'm, of course, very convinced of the huge progress that the International Tribunal made. But I'm very, very, very alarmed, and I think that it is a great limitation to the tribunal, is that finally things were made and continue to be made very much on nationalistic lines. The Croats are fine with prosecuting war criminals as long as they're Serbs. The Serbs are fine with as long as they're not Serbs. And this is, for me, a form of a cancer of society. In the sense that with such attitudes, I fear that what we are aiming for is a closure. The word was there. It is not going to happen. And I just want to take this opportunity to say that I think that the real progress will be the day for every country in the world. I do not want to singularize either the Serbs or the Croats, but I will take this example because we are here today. The day when Croats will be eager to prosecute Croats who committed terrible crimes. The day when the Serbs will be eager to prosecute Serbs, because they will understand that indeed for the future, for the closure, for justice, for international justice to be a stepping stone towards long-term peace, this is a vital step. This is such a vital step. And I'm sorry to say that in this sense, justice and transitional justice continues to be politicized. And I think that those of us who are in a position to say so must say so. And I think the only thing useful I can do today, 30 years later, is to say this. Because, to close what I have to say, we are, in comparison with 1945, 29 years old have passed, which would be the equivalent of 1974 for 1945. Are the relations in the Balkans the equivalent of what France and Germany did? How many thousands of Ovčaras were there between France and Germany? How many thousands? And are we anywhere near the point when both together will say, yes, really we did to each other terrible things, to each other, with which, of course, I do not want to minimize the atrocity of Ovčara at all, but it also has a symbolic value with which we must be careful. Thank you.
Mr. Bossinger is that gentleman, but on that picture. And I was trying to get a hold of him during the time when I was working for the tribunal. And because he was working for the Red Cross, we were never allowed to talk. And this is, for me, is amazing opportunity for you to thank you for what you did for the people there. Not as an investigator from the tribunal, but as a human being. You saved hundreds of people personally. In Mitnica, and also there. And I don't think it was. I didn't have opportunity to recognize it publicly, and I would like to say it. Mr. Bossinger is a hero of the situation in Vukovar, and I would like to thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you.
And I can tell you from an individual point of view, it is one of the greatest regrets of my life, not having been able to testify.
Yeah, we understand that. We understand the politics behind that, but...
It's not politics. It's saving the mission of the ICRC.
Yeah.
The day that an ICRC delegate has to testify, his successors in the field will never be able.
Absolutely. No, we understand that. I'm in politics.
No.
And I'm in the politics. Absolutely.
From a personal point of view, be assured that I would have loved it.
Yeah. And thank you for Tomislav, who actually put us together. There was a Croatian journalist I met in The Hague during the presentation I did in The Hague. And I did an interview for Croatian journal for the Croatian paper about 2 weeks ago. And he told me that he knows you. And I said, can you please write to him and ask him if he had a time to come for the presentation? But I didn't recognize you. Thank you for coming here and thank you for your work. And any other questions?
Oksana Nishonska from the University of I studied in the situation of Ukraine, the cases when paramilitaries committed crimes against civilians in the past are celebrated as heroes, where local culture is very, very important with commemorations and so on. What do you see, what happens at the local level, because there are still communities of people who have very different beliefs and celebrate those as heroes who defended the nations and so on. What can be done for such deep cultural levels of understanding of the meaning which is attributed on this level? What can we do? What is your experience?
I'll tell you, I'll answer to this. I think Mr. Bossinger, actually said it better than I would probably say it. If you look at the former Yugoslavia, the people who were prosecuted for the war crimes come back home to their countries and they are treated as heroes. Arkan, who was a criminal before the war, he became the war criminal during the war, who was responsible for killing many people, in Croatia, in Bosnia-Herzegovina. When he was killed as a criminal in Belgrade, 10,000 people came to his funeral. So now, as long as you have the peoples of those countries celebrating the war criminals as a heroes, there will be no healing, and it goes us across the board. Mr. Bosin should talk about the denazification. In Germany after World War II went through this denazification. It was a process where the society was reborn, basically. I don't see in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I'm not going to make any political statements, I'm not in a position, that such a process was started. And then what I saw from the elections, I don't think that the situation is any better than it was before the war. And I'm not making any suggestions to any direction. But there has to be a process of healing. And we have a high expectation sometimes that people forget very quickly what happened to them. If somebody murders your family, burns your house, and rapes your sister or mother, and all of a sudden you expect it to forget very quickly, I think these expectations are just too far-fetched. What I also think that if the local courts were able to prosecute the criminals locally on all sides, there'll be no need for any tribunals. Expect it that somebody from your community, I'm pointing as a community somewhere, will be happy that 1,000 kilometers away in The Hague, somebody will be prosecuted for the war crimes, and you'll be satisfied with this. It's also questionable. The best practice would be if the local courts were able to prosecute the local criminals regardless of their nationalities. But it didn't happen. That's why the tribunal was put in place. So the healing process is a long time. It cannot be done overnight, because just try to put yourself into the situation. When something like that happens to you. If somebody steals something from you or injures you somewhere in the street, and how long it takes for you to get over this, and how long it takes actually for the people where the whole villages were, killed. Everybody they knew was killed. All the pictures and every personal belongings were burned. They came through the conflict and had nothing. Expectation that it's going to be forgotten and then everybody be living together in peace and harmony in a short time, I think the expectations are not realistic. But I wish that it could be done. I think that, we need to call it off.
We need to call it off, not need, but we can continue our discussion next door. But I want to thank, first of all the participation now also in the discussion. In addition, we thanked already, obviously, our guest here today, and it shows really the need for individual stories, because this is not, as you pointed out all the time, this is not about numbers, this is not about elites or about strategies or about who is smarter. It's about individual stories, and war creates these individual suffering, these individual stories, and we need to tell them with the idea that this is not happening again. And we see this coming back to the question of the Nazi regime, for example, that those who can witness that, who have been there, are unfortunately leaving us. So what's the next generation need to do in order to prevent this? And I think we need to prevent these kind of sufferings. We shouldn't sit here, actually. I wish we would not sit here and discuss this, but we need to sit here to discuss this in order to prevent future violence. And on this note, next door there's some refreshments, some drinks, but I want to thank you all for coming in such high numbers and for being with us here at the Geneva Academy for such difficult topics, but that's what we need to do. I think that's our obligation, the responsibility. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.